Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great. I'm Kirti Sophia Panachan, and in today's session we'll be continuing the chapter Toba Takes Singh by Saadat Hassan Manto, and this is part 5. Let's move on to the chapter. All preparations for the transfer had been completed. Lists of patients had been exchanged and the day of the transfer had been set. On an extremely cold day, lorries filled with Hindu and Sikh lunatics left the asylum in Lahore, accompanied by the police and some higher officials. At Wagah, the superintendents from both sides met, and after the initial formalities were out of the way, the actual transfer began, continuing all night. Getting the lunatics out of the lorries and handing them over to the Indian officials proved to be an arduous task. Arduous means a very difficult task. Many of them refused to leave the lorries, and those who did ran about wildly, making it difficult for the guards and other officials to keep them under control. Those who were naked tore off any clothing that was forced on them. Many swore and cursed. One or two sang, some fought with each other, and others cried or wailed. Confusion was rampant. Rampant means widely spread. It was pure bedlam. Bedlam means a noisy, confused state. The women were also a problem, and the cold weather made everyone's teeth chatter. Most of the lunatics were not in favor of the transfer because they could not comprehend the reasons for being uprooted from one place and thrown into another. One or two people, not completely mad, shouted Pakistan Zindabad and Pakistan Murdabad. This infuriated both the Muslims and Sikhs, and altercations between them were avoided with great difficulty. Infuriated means made angry. Altercations means noisy argument or a disagreement. In this part, we could see that all the preparations for the transfer were done. The lists of patients were exchanged and the day of the transfer was fixed. On an extremely cold day, lorries were filled with Hindu and Sikh lunatics left the asylum. It was accompanied by police and higher officials. And at Wagah, after the initial formalities, the formal transfer began. Getting the lunatics out of the lorries and handing them over to the Indian officials was a hard task. Most of them refused to leave even the lorries, and the ones who left the lorries ran around wildly, making it difficult to control them. Some of them removed their clothes, some swore and cursed, some sang, and some others fought, some even cried, and there was utter confusion over there. Women were also a big problem. It was very cold and the weather made their teeth chatter. Their teeth was hitting on each other. Most lunatics did not like the transfer because they did not understand the reason for uprooting themselves from one place and keeping them in another place. One or two people shouted Pakistan Zindabad, Pakistan Murdabad, and all, and this made some people angry, and it was difficult to stop them from fighting. When Bishan Singh's turn came to cross the border, he asked the official who was entering his name in a register, "Where is Toba Tek Singh? In Pakistan or in India?" The official laughed and said, "In Pakistan." On hearing this, Bishan Singh leaped back and ran towards the remaining group of men who awaited their turn. The Pakistani soldiers caught him and tried to force him back to the checkpoint. He resisted vigorously. Toba Singh is here, he yelled. Yelled means to cry loudly. Opadi, Gurgurdi, Annexdi, Bai Dania di, Mung Dal di of Toba Singh and Pakistan. The authorities attempted to reason with him. Look, Toba Singh is in Hindustan now, and if he's not there yet, we'll send him there immediately. But he was adamant. Adamant means strong, and would not budge from the spot where he stood. Budge means move. When the guards threatened to use force, he installed himself in a place between the borders and stood there as if no power in the world could move him. Because he was a harmless man, he was allowed to remain there while the transfer continued. Before the sun rose, a piercing cry arose from Bishan Singh, who had been quiet and still all this time. Several officers and the guards ran towards him. They saw that the man who had stood on his legs day and night for 15 years now lay on the ground prostrate. Prostrate is to lie stretched out on the ground with one's face. Beyond a wired fence on one side of him was Hindustan, and beyond a wired fence on the other side was Pakistan. In the middle, on a stretch of land that had no name, lay Toba Singh. In this part, we could see the turn of Bishan Singh has come for the transfer, and he asked the official entering his name on the register where was Toba Singh, whether Toba Singh was in India or in Pakistan. The officer said, in Pakistan. On hearing this, Bishan Singh ran back to the group who was waiting their turn. The Pakistani soldiers caught him and forced him back to the checkpoint, but he resisted strongly. He said that Toba Singh was in Pakistan, so he is remaining there. The authorities then told him it was now in Hindustan, but he refused to move from the spot he stood. When the guards threatened to use force, he stood in a place between the borders as if no power could move him. Because he was a harmless man, the authorities allowed him to stay there while the transfer continued. Before the sun rose, a piercing cry arose from Bishan Singh, who was silent all the time. All this time he was silent, but suddenly a huge cry. Several officers and guards ran towards him. They saw the man who stood on his legs day and night for 15 years. He was standing all the time, but now he was laying on the ground. He was laying facing the ground, fully stretched, and on one side of him was Pakistan, and on the other side was India. In the middle, on a stretch of land where there was no name for that land, lay Toba Singh. This is how the story comes to an end. Through this story, Manto has narrated a clear picture of what happened after the partition. Before the partition, the Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs lived in peace and harmony like brothers. But once the partition, the Hindu and Sikhs were one group and they were sent to India, and Muslims were another group and they were supposed to go to Pakistan. The pain and suffering of the people who had to flee from their homes, abandoning everything they had just because of their religious belief is truly portrayed through a number of works of Manto. So I hope this session was fruitful for you all. The chapter comes to an end. We'll see you again in the next session. Thank you so much.